Winchell. Every time I hear your last name, I think of Winchell's Donuts. Are they even still around?
I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you one story about me. When I lived in, it was Sandy, Utah, I was living in. There was a Winchell's Donuts down the street, and I had some fun. I pulled out my Alaskan driver's license, went in there, and there was some young kids working there too. I pulled it out. I showed my driver's license to him. I said, "I'm from quality control from Winchell's Corporate." I go, "My name's Josh. My name's it's Corey Winchell. I was born Corey Winchell. It's Corey Winchell." And I need to inspect this place and possibly, taste some of these donuts. And they walked me in the back. And then they were like, "Wait a minute." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, you caught me. I'm just joking around. Let me buy 6 donuts." So I don't know that they're around anymore. They were at one time. I think Dunkin's put them out of business. So I don't know.
I remember when I was living in Denver with my folks. Um, I remember they had a bunch of Winchell's Donuts there, and they were good. I mean, they weren't bad at all. Um, now that you told me that trick, since you're a former attorney, I assume there's no problem with me at all just walking in the back with of a Krispy Kreme there, right? You're telling me that's perfectly legal. So
Yeah,
I'm
don't. I told them I wasn't. I actually came clean. I wanted to. Yeah, it was something. I was like, "Let's do this, man. Let's do." Because I was called Donut. I was the captain of my football team, state football, and my whole name. They called me Donut my whole life, and I was like, "Can't you call me Winch? Can't you call me something else other than Donut?" And yeah, I've gotten that all my life. I haven't heard that actually in about 30 years. So that's my background. So
you,
I did
you
tell
would have
her.
been fine with Winch. I mean, that sounds so close to Winch. You don't want that.
Well, yeah, they never called me. I don't know. I was just like, "Donut for real?" They're like, "Come here," but they didn't take it too far. Juneau has no Winchell's donuts, so only a few of them knew about it. So
Dude, yeah, man. I'm from Alaska. In fact, um, I was 5 years old when McDonald's hit Juneau, the first McDonald's. And I remember asking my mom and dad because I heard them talking about it, what it was, and they said, "Well, it's a place where you could go eat hamburgers." And I'm like, "Well, we make hamburgers at home." And then I remember we drove by, like mom and dad really, really wanted a Big Mac, I guess. But I remember sitting in line for hours, dude, waiting to get through the drive-through, and people were lined up on foot out of the store. I mean, it was a big deal back then. So let me ask you this. We're going to reminisce here for just a little bit more. In Juneau, there was a hotel called the Prospector that used to serve buffets. Is that still there?
interestingly enough, the sister to the mother of my children, Jessica, we're all very tight. Even though my wife's mainstream and I've followed the 132 and we've stayed very close friends. She is the manager there. Her name's Jessica. It's called the Ramada now, but it's still the Prospector to everybody that ever knows it. That big sign that you're talking about, because
The
everybody
old
remembers the
man?
sign.
The
It
old
is
man.
now over. It is over right next to a place, and everybody can see it by the side of the road. And I was like, I should buy that. I should buy that Prospector sign because it's like the Alaska Airlines sign. You got
Yeah,
that
dude.
really notable picture of that. I think he's Aleut or he could be a Nupik, the native. And then you've also got the Prospector sign, which is the sourdough.
I'll tell you what, when I was a kid living there with my folks, um, as you and I have talked, um, on the Prospector Hotel, there used to be a picture of an old weathered prospector. And I remember Sunday mornings, we would go and have breakfast there at the buffet. And I used to call it the old man because I didn't know what a prospector was or how to pronounce prospector, probably. And so we always used to just call it the old man's. But we'd go in there and we'd have dinner, or excuse me, breakfast once a week at the breakfast buffet.
It was the had a light called the Prospector, and they had this huge old letter like Old West lettering called the Prospector Hotel, and it was called the Diggins Room back then, and it was a mining motif. But back when
Yep.
you were there at 5 or 6, you'd walk in there and you'd see these old like hats, and you'd have like a little dangling light from the
Yep.
1930s. It's called Diggins. Now it's called TK McGuire's, and it's the Ramada, but same room. I grew up in it every what is it? Every Easter. Grandma, who was not she was not religious either. She's actually religious, but not she wouldn't go to church. She would take us down every Easter and stuff like that, and we'd do the buffet stuff. I go
Dude,
there
that's
actually probably once a month. I know everybody there, so
Oh man, that's where I developed my utter love for biscuits and gravy. They had killer biscuits and gravy.
I've been the world round, and Mike's Place in Douglas, which is closed now, but Mike's Place in Douglas, which is an island right next to our city, like 2 miles away. It's the same thing as our city. And the Prospector made the best roast beef. And I've been all over. I've been to France. I've been to Europe. I've been all over. The best roast beef I've ever had in my life. So, I mean, it is good food. I mean, it's decent food. People go there for the fish when they come up to Alaska. But anyway, so.
Totally. Well, man, I'm glad you're here, and we're gonna start talking about the armor of God, right? This is the first one in the series, and look, I've had you on before with Drew when we were talking about the restored scriptures, but we didn't get a lot of time to talk about you. And I wanted to get us off on the right foot here by having you talk a little bit about yourself. Tell us how you got here. Kind of give us your Mormon credentials.
Okay. To give you a background, I'm what you would I'll tell you what I call myself. Let me give you a background as to what I've done. My studies, how do I do this? I've been LDS my whole life. I've been a what you call a fundamentalist for at least 16 years. At least. It's closer, it's pushing 18 now. I don't have a community here in Juneau um, that that is conducive to it. So I ended up attending the church. And so if you would have come into, say, Mormon doctrine class and the topics turned to either Adam or other things, you sitting in there would know exactly what I was saying. But they would slowly get it. I would say we've been to the temple, and as you know, when we go to the temple, we're learning the things of the Lord and the things of God and the things of eternity. And he always seems to teach us that Michael um, created the earth under the tutelage of Elohim and Jehovah. And it appears that he really wants us to emulate Michael. And then, my eyes look around the room. Nobody gets it. But David's sitting in the room going, Wench, you need to come down. You need to come down to Utah. You really do, brother. And so it was like that for about a decade, a little less. I've got no acrimony per se. I love these. I've known them my whole life. This is my town. I've been here off and on. Like I said, I've lived all over the world. I've lived in the Southwest. I've made it through. I didn't live in Missouri, but I've been there a few times. Um, so
That's called the
Juneau's
great
my
state of Missouri.
Missouri. Yeah, I do use the A because I know a lot of people there. I don't use the I. So it's Missouri to me, and I've got friends. I've had friends there in KC, and the rest. KC was my team for a lot of years. My football coach was a lineman for the Kansas City Chiefs back in the early 70s. And so
Oh,
anyway, so I think but to give you a background, I'm true blue through and through. My conversion story came through a series of testimony builders at research and some just private stuff. I don't get into this online because much, but a series of dreams and a series of, we'll just say, personal reflections. You might call them like intimate personal revelations that we really have to get back to the religion that was restored because we have a leader, a dispensation leader, and they only come around once every little while. And I really started coming back to the knowledge of it. So I asked a lot of questions. I did a lot of things. It was done very privately for myself. But after a few years, I just came out and said, I need to find people that understand me. And I found them. And you're one of them. So I can give you my background actually is law. I was a lawyer for, I think, 11 years. I still am. I mean, I've got my licenses. I just pay them up. Licensed in 3 states, pay them up, and I'm back in the seat. The Lord actually, I feel it was very personal, said, you need to repent of this and forsake this profession. And if you're going to do it, you need to do it either pro bono and you need to do it for the elderly, maybe like some probates and some wills, or for bankruptcy to help people get out of crushing debt. But you don't need to be a part of this anymore. And that was debilitating for me. I did love the practice. I was a corporate counsel, business counsel. I practiced general law. But it was pretty clear, pretty much time. So I went back to blue collar work and some other private businesses. My background prior to that, I studied actually down there in Cedar City at SUU. I studied political science and I minored in history. And the interesting thing with that is my grades didn't suffer, but I got magna cum laude. It wasn't summa. I got magna in the areas of my interest, which was political science and history. And I loved history so much, I was going to become a historian. But I started looking around about the time of oh gosh, what's his name? Oh, very, very, very famous church historian, the most Hugh Nibley. Hugh Nibley. I looked at Hugh Nibley's works and realized he was so intelligent, so amazingly intelligent. But I would look at some of these historians bear their testimony, and they'd stand up and start arguing about what this doctor thought, or what this researcher thought, or what that archaeologist thought. And I felt that they started losing a little bit, just a little bit, of their testimony and the raw or core doctrine. So I went to political science and became a political historian. I mean, if you would have known me back then, my big thing was Polybius and Thucydides. I don't look like this, but I was a geek, man. Thucydides and Polybius, the history of the Peloponnesian War and the history of the Roman Republic. I mean, if you know Linus from Peanuts,
Hmm.
like that piano player, put a bust of Beethoven on his piano, would have had a bust of Polybius like right there on my side. That's what I was like back then.
I bet you
So
all the chicks dug that.
no, dude, no, 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 man. I mean, they dug me. They didn't dig that. You know what I did? I'll tell you what I did. I put the quote of Patrick Henry on my phone message machine.
That's all right.
I quoted Patrick Henry's fiery rhetorical give me
Give
liberty and
me
give me death,
liberty or give me death.
the whole thing. I can quote. I'm not going to do it for you, but I can quote it. I stuck that on my phone machine, and the only ladies that ever stuck around were the ones that could handle that. And there were a couple. I mean, you got to hand it to them. That was me back then, David. So I wanted you to see who I was so that you could see where I've come from and then where I am today. What you would call a political historian. I don't believe there's a science to it. I believe it's political history, and you've got maxims that apply in political history to everything. So you're going to see me approach that this way tonight, but you're going to see it testimonial. You're going to see faith rather than this doctor or that researcher or that archaeologist. So anyway, that's a background of me, man. I mean, I'm a Mormon, true blue through and through. I'm a fundamentalist. I'm a Musserite, is what you guys call. I have my priesthood through Joseph Musser, and I'm an independent. And I don't know what else to tell you, man. I just feel like I've spilled a lot of my history in the last 5 minutes, more than you probably knew. So
Oh, it's good. It's good. Look, there are bad attorneys for sure, but there's also some good ones too. And shout out to Randall Edwards. He's one of the good ones. And so like I don't necessarily subscribe to the all attorneys are bad thing, right? I think attorneys are needed. I I think the average layperson is going to have a hard time navigating the entirety of known history of jurisprudence and stare decisis in America. And so I do think that they're absolutely needed, and there are definitely some good ones out there. So at what point, Josh, did you start realizing because because here's the thing. When you start talking about becoming a fundamentalist, there's like stages to it, right? It doesn't just happen overnight most of the time. So there's definitely stages there. At what point were you like all of a sudden like, oh man, I think I'm a fundamentalist?
what happened? It's just actually a good story. I was 19, mainstream, preparing for my mission. And I went in to BYU, Idaho, back then was called Rick's. And I spoke to a gentleman that I knew from childhood. And I said, I'm having issues understanding the notion of plural marriage. And the problem really wasn't doctrinal for me, it was cultural, because
Mm.
I'm raised in a place. It's really odd because people, even Protestants, even non-religious, they'll practice their variants of plural marriage. They just aren't up to the moral standard that, say, others maybe. And I'm not trying to be arrogant about this, but we have established mores and rules and morals about it. They'll do it, but they won't call it that. And they'll excuse it in so many different ways. And so I was having problems back then. I was saying, why do we do this? What's the real deal behind this? And we had a nice little just discussion, a little bit of a religious knockdown drag out. And he just said, at some point or another, you have to have faith that Joseph Smith and these men knew what they were doing, and that plural marriage was the law. And this was coming from a church theologian in the educational CES system that I trusted. And he was not doing apologetics. He was telling me straight up, if you're going to understand it, you got to have faith in it. And it took me about two or 3 months, no, I would say 8 months into my mission. And I remember the calming influence I felt. It was, you don't have the faith or the wherewithal right now, but when you do, this is the law of heaven.
Mm.
And I took that and I started getting into Mormon doctrine through McConkie. I went into obviously Joseph Smith's teachings, Brigham Young's, and the rest of it. Never got deeply involved in the Journal of Discourses until the last few years. But I taught myself through the teachings and all I could get from Joseph Smith, and I just said, I'm going to be a dry, uh, plural celestial marriage advocate. I'm going to be dry about this, but I'm going to believe in this. I'm going to do it. I'm not going to apologize for it ever again. I'm not going to feel bad or ashamed of it again. And if somebody brings it up, I'm not going to be belligerent, but I'm going to be the one at the church saying, why do we have this problem where everybody looks at the floor when this subject's brought up? And then I was the one not advocating it. I was the one saying, shame on the other people for not letting us believe and practice. And I went through that stage for about 10 years without being a severe advocate. The issue would only come up maybe once or twice a year. And then from there, I realized that there was the Adam God doctrine. And I'd say that's the early 2000s when I realized that I'd been going to a temple repeatedly and been being shown exaltation in its very framework hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. That was the Lord was saying, are you clean? Have you lived these 5 principles? Do you believe in the law of Elohim? Do you believe in the law of the Lord? Do you believe in all the other laws? Okay, if you do, let me show you something. Let me show you Adam. Let me show you a man named Jehovah and Elohim. And then after 60, 70, 80 times, I just looked at that and I said, you and all of you must place yourself as Adam at the altar, because I've been told that hundreds of times. And I just looked up and I said, okay. I'm going to place myself as Adam at the altar. What do you want me to do? And then all of a sudden it came to me and all of the things. And so I got it independently. I didn't get it through the fundamentalists. I got it independent of that. And for many years, I thought I'd have to go do it on my own. I thought of fundamentalists down in Utah and thereabouts kind of as LDS versions of the Amish, or the Mennonites. I'm not making fun because I know you guys so well. I am one, but I was like, oh, they're kind of the Mennonites. They're the Amish, and I'm going to go do this the way Joseph did it. And after a few years, the Lord's like, no, 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 nope. These guys have got to key in, align in, and you guys need to go down. You need to go down. And you met me a couple, 2.5, maybe 3 years. Oh no, you would have met me 2.5 years ago. And so I started. So that was my story is a little bit. It's not the classic story. I did go through my brief Heber J. Grant's The Devil time, just like you do. You did, you Heber J.
I
Grant really
mean,
did own
did,
the
dude.
church.
I'm still there.
Yeah, well, I am too. With the thing,
It's Wilford. I mean, I have a soft spot for Wilford. I think he was put in a tremendously horrible position. I do think he chose wrong, obviously. But for me, Grant ultimately is where everything goes off the rails and goes awry.
what happened with me is I'm with you. And if you look at my posts online, I've been brutally honest, not brutal, but brutally honest about what the Grantites did to the church, because they are the literal descendants of a Grantite, an apostasy of the Grantites. But when you look at what he was doing in the 30s and 40s with his kids, he was preaching the principle to his kids, because Truman Madsen he used to get on tapes and talk about his grandfather preaching the principle in 1932 to his uncle. And I'm like, what's going on here? I thought he was the one back in 1912 that was throwing that wonderful apostle or 1911, 13, that wonderful apostle, John W. Taylor, trying to throw him out of the church after they'd scooted him out of the 12 apostles in '06. And so I started letting up a little bit, realizing that he's a bureaucrat, he's a politico, he's lost his shine, but he certainly doesn't disbelieve in plural marriage. It's just not true. Wilford
Well,
Woodruff,
that's true, right? That is correct. I get that he never lost his testimony of the principle, but he's the last polygamous prophet we have and is very hard on polygamists. And the problem is that when I look at Grant, it smacks of rules for thee, but not for me. And that's where he tends to lose me a lot, is kind of that hypocrisy.
let me tell you, I'm on your side. Let's tag team Heber for a second. In 1906, what they did was, so because I've read the notes on both his excommunication and what they did when he left the quorum. But in 1906, by '04, they started bringing monogamists en masse into the 12.
Mhm.
By 1911 or 13, whenever they excommunicated him, they brought the monogamists and let them ask questions while Joseph F. Smith was in the background. He asked twice, because I've read the ledger of his excommunication. He asked to speak to the prophet twice. And the prophet, not only did the prophet not do it, Heber J. Grant whispered into the monogamists who were asking these questions. They had no evidence. It was a complete sham show by monogamists who had taken over the high priesthood and were running it pretty much into mammonism. So I'm with you. I am with you 100%. That there's no doubt. Here's the thing I have against dear Wilford Woodruff. I agree with you up and until 1898. Until then, I would agree that he was placed in a bad place. But if you read his journal himself, the last 3 pages of his journal, he went over to San Francisco. He met with dozens and dozens and dozens of politicos for statehood. He stayed at his lobbyist's house. The church was saying, "No, he's over there. He's doing a little bit of a respite because he's old." No, he wasn't. He met with the Bohemian Club and was invited on a 2-week camping trip.
Mhm.
What that means is that means the Bohemian Grove. He was invited on a 2-week camping trip, then brought in front of the entire Bohemian Club, met with their hierophant, their high priest, and had a lovely time. He died 5 days later. This
Yep.
was always about statehood. So he said, if I ever do something that the Lord doesn't agree with, it is not the program. He will take my life. And I say, promise made, promise kept. That guy was going to join in with the Western elite. He was going to head up to the Bohemian Grove on a 2-week camp out, and then he was meeting with those guys. I know that this is going to be electric for many people. For me, Brigham Young was placed in such an awful situation, but he was a Samson Shorn to me. How dare, and then the church, when he died, said he was over there on respite. He was convalescing. That's what they said publicly. He's over there, he's not convalescing. He's politicking up for statehood and the senators. And then the very next month, when you have Lorenzo Snow asking the Lord, Lorenzo Snow sees the Lord out in the balustrade instead of the Holy of Holies. Can I tell you my take?
Yeah.
Can I
Yeah.
tell
Dude,
my take?
look,
And
okay.
I'm gonna
Let's
it's gonna start a little bit of a fire. My
let's
take.
let's let first thing we need to do, let's qualify this.
Okay.
This is this in the realm of theory?
Uh, I have the evidence I have comes indirectly, and it is hearsay. So I'll tell you that, and it is my opinion. It is not. I'm very fair. Remember my historical background. I
Yep,
will
yep, yep, yep.
always tell you. Yeah, I'm not going to preach doctrine when it's only me. So
Sure, sure. Okay, so
we we
this
have
is
it on
Josh's
good.
theory on things.
We have it on good information that the granddaughter of Lorenzo Snow was asked by a very close, we'll just say a contact within my, it was Ogden, but he spoke to the granddaughter and said, "Hey, you know that discussion with the Lord on the right by the steps and not in the Holy of Holies, did that have to do with what happened with polygamy, plural marriage? Did the Lord say, I'm never going to speak to you again inside this Holy of Holies because of plural marriage?" And Ogden said that she assented to what he said. I don't know if it was verbal, nonverbal, a head nod or whatever, but she said, my grandfather spoke to me. And when he said, just answer by nod or not nod, Kevin's going to be the one that knows the story better. I do believe that the Lord no longer was in the Holy of Holies because of the way that ended, and specifically because Wilford Woodruff went to San Francisco and bent the knee and kissed the ring. I really believe that, brother. I believe that at that point, the Lord said, I can speak to you right here and right here by the stairs. That suits me just fine. I love you, Lorenzo. Do this. There's tithing to do, other types of things to do. We're not going to discuss anything in that Holy of Holies until we get this thing right again, until we go back and get it right. That's my personal belief. So, am I a fundamentalist? I tend to think so.
Yeah.
I take exception to both Heber and Heber J. Grant and Wilford at the end, but I know what you're saying. I've read his Revelations of 1880. Tremendous. When he was down there in Arizona and being told to never give up plural marriage,
Mhm.
all of that stuff. Just tremendous man. He was a tremendous man, but he was a Samson Shorn. He went to San Francisco and he did those things, David. I'll get you, or you can get online and go read the diaries. It'll break your heart. It'll break your heart in two. Because when you say, what is a 2 week vacation with the Bohemian Club? And then
Right.
he met with them later. He didn't go on vacation. He met with them and he sat right next to their leading hierophant. This guy had participated in what's called the crematorium of care. That's where they basically engage in a crematorium. It's what the Bohemian Grove is, what everybody gets scared about. He had already participated in half a dozen of those. This person that he's sitting next to and getting chummy with. And anyway, I don't want to start a fire. I'm just saying Wilford Woodruff was a great man, but he was a Samson and a Samson Shorn, and that's how I felt.
Gotcha. All right. So that kind of covers how you got here. And so now you're just up there in Alaska working, doing your thing.
I have, yeah, I have investments up here. I've got my kids up here. We're going to be online. I've got children. Two of them are of age. They're of majority age. I'm raising two more. I have a close, decent relationship with their mother. We married as mainstream, and you know where that lies. We have a very decent relationship, but I am who I am, and you know what I mean by that. So.
Yep. Yep.
And
Nope.
so
I get you.
I'm here in Juneau. My background, like I said, is political history, and then I went and took a law degree at Gonzaga and practiced law for a good 11 years. Hung up the gloves. You talk to me about good lawyers. I tend to agree with you. Let me give you a couple of stories. My son, there at the end, when I was doing a couple of things, this was up here in Juneau. My heyday, I was a regional corporate counsel at one point for a PEO that was rather large. We had 6 states. It was between 20 and 30,000, maybe even 40,000 worksite employees. And I was traveling around taking care of a lot of things. Um, but later in my career, my son would argue with me about everything at all under the sun. Somebody would say, that's blue. And he'd say, no, Dad, that's actually cerulean. It's cerulean and it's not blue. And I looked over at him and I was like, we're going to do this at the dinner table. It's like, I do this all day. We're going to do this. And I remember praying. And after a while, the Lord's just saying, he's saying, there's so much for you. There's so much for them. This isn't your ballywick. This is going to make you into something that I can't reach. And that's what I mean. And so lawyers, there are good ones. But if you follow that line instead of becoming a judge in Zion or a judge in Israel, you become argumentative, you become obstreperate. I'm not saying all lawyers, not your lawyers that, Donovan was a decent man for Joseph Smith. There are good lawyers, but they have to be careful about where they take their passions.
Gotcha. Gotcha. 10-4. All right. Well, let's dig into it, man. You're up here. It's your turn. What we're talking about the armor of God, and yeah, let's just get into it. You took um the um the hell the to gird your loins about with truth.
Right.
So let's get into her.
Okay. Well, let's start. I'm going to use some words, and again, I'm going to tell you, I'm a man of passion, as you heard with some of my things about John W. Taylor and some of those things with I'm a man of passion, but I do need to. I'd like to start what's called it's called exegesis or
Yep.
exegesis. It's called the who, what, when, where, and how of Ephesians 6:11 through 18. That's your armor of God. So let's just get into it. The epistle itself by Paul. I'm going to throw out some facts. I gave you a bibliography so that you didn't think I was just pulling it out of thin air out of a hat.
Sure.
All of
And
this is going to be
we'll post that with this episode show notes as well to make
perfect.
sure that people see that as well. Now, on those pictures you sent me, did you want to share those on the podcast?
If you want to, I'll reference them and you can pull them up. You just slow me down and you say, "Hey,
Okay.
Josh, slow down and let's get this up here." But I'm going to walk through some facts. I usually take the majority view, and where I don't take the majority view, I explain why I'm taking the minority or the growing majority here. And the reason I do that is so that you guys don't think I'm just making stuff up to fit my argument. In fundamentalism, especially, you'll see a lot of guys, they'll come out with an idea and then they'll try to fit the idea doctrinally by coming off with some tangent. And you've got to say, hey, we've got a lot of people doing this for a long time, and this is what we think. So here we go. Nearly all scholars agree that Paul was enduring his first imprisonment at Rome, I think between the years of 60 to 62 when he wrote the epistle that's called Ephesians. Now, most of those scholars conclude that it wasn't written to the Ephesians. It wasn't written to the Ephesians exclusively, as the underlying text, it never mentioned Ephesus, but referenced the saints throughout the regions. So the existing document, the underlying text, most scholars would agree that it was a circular. It didn't say Ephesus, it said to the churches abroad. So technically, if you want to just throw out technicalities, Paul is writing to the churches. It would be the epistle of Paul to the churches. Now, how did it get
Mm.
Ephesus on it? Ephesus was the headquarters of Paul in Asia Minor. They're like the seven
Oh.
churches. His main church was in Ephesus. So if he wanted to circulate this out into Asia Minor or the world at large, his headquarters would have been Ephesus. So here he goes. He's in Rome now. He's imprisoned in Rome. He's under house arrest, in bonds or chains, and he's saying, I'm going to write to all the churches." And then obviously he'd have to send that to Ephesus. So what we have now is the book of Ephesians, and also the scholars also say that the text that we have was written between, say, 70 and 100 AD. That's 3 to 33 years after Paul was dead. So the text that we have comes between 3 to 33 years after he died. So it was a circular. It was people writing stuff down or sending it out or doing that.
Which
So
really though, for that time period, that's not like that's nothing that should throw anybody into, doubting what the
right.
authenticity of Ephesus,
No,
right?
no, no,
30 to
no,
70
yeah.
years is really quite, that shows that it was at least making circulation well before that, right?
That's how they
And
did. In fact, like you said, Ephesians is one of the earliest texts we got because some of them were hundreds of years
right,
later. But I'm not trying to do it to doubt it. What I'm doing is you're going to see he's writing to the entire church. He wants
right.
everybody everywhere. It's not to the Ephesians over here, it's to everybody everywhere. And you're going to see it in there. And it's important for us tonight because we're going to talk about putting on the whole armor of God, but we need to do a little background to see how do we even get to armor and why are we talking about it. So even though the existing text was 3 to 33 years after that, um, he was discussing these things with the entire church. Now, as you know, Ephesus served as for Paul in his early missions as the headquarters, and he served roughly. I think there were 3 missions that are ascribable to Paul. So that's kind of the background of this text. But to get to the text, you have to see how Paul got to Rome. So I'm going to kind of get into, and this is going to bring up some of our first pictures. I'm going to show pretty much how Paul got over to Rome after his missions. Paul
Hey,
made his way.
Josh,
Go ahead.
Josh, I don't mean to screw up your flow, but as soon as you want me to bring up a picture, let me know and I'll start sharing my screen, okay?
We're going to bring up the Sorig, which is going to be that first picture of that beautiful tile that has the warning of anybody coming into the
Gotcha.
inner court. So we're going to do that here in a second, but I want to get to that by giving a background. So it says Paul was under house arrest in Judea from 58 to 60 AD, roughly, after a group of Jewish men accused him of bringing a man named Trophimus, which was a Greek, beyond the Sorig into the inner court of the temple at Jerusalem. So I used a lot of fancy words. I used a word called Sorig and inner court of the temple at Jerusalem. What the Sorig is, it was a set of staves or fencing that would block off the inner court from the court of the Gentiles. And
Okay.
so if you walked past a certain point, you would enter into what was called the inner court. And they would have these warnings, and these warnings are intense. We're going to read that here if you want. Let me pull up my, so I know you're going to have it online, but let me pull up mine so that I can be there with you. There's
Can
Paul.
you see my screen here, by the way?
Let me,
I'm sure.
I'm going back and forth between applications. I can see that. I've got
Okay.
mine pulled up, and it shows a tile. It says this is a tile that they actually found um, during the era actually of Paul. It was roughly in that time period, but it would have been both in the Koine Greek, and it would be done in Latin as well for the benefit of strangers. And so in 58, Paul's in Jerusalem celebrating Feast of Pentecost, is what this says. And while he's in the city, he meets with James, Jesus' half brother, and other Christian elders. That's Acts. It's quoting it there for you. And you can find this, by the way. I put the www.biblestudy.org. It says, but they, the Jews, having been informed that you are teaching all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to apostatize from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children nor walk in the customs. Now, I don't want to be crude with you, but if you brought an uncircumcised person beyond the sorig, that is almost prima facie, as a legal term of you are found absolutely guilty. If you walk an uncircumcised male, adult male, into the inner court, you're bringing Gentiles into the court under the guise and auspices of those Jews. And so there's been arguments throughout that Paul never brought Trophimus in, but what you can see is Paul converted roughly about 34. Traditionally, it holds that he converted at 34 AD. We're moving 24 years past that to 58, or roughly around there. And he's coming into the Sorig, and all of his old Pharisaical friends are now aged, and they're saying, that's Paul or Saul of Tarsus. He's running about with all the Jews throughout the kingdom, or up in Asia Minor, throughout Damascus, all of the areas, and he's teaching them not to circumcise. And so these guys get really excited. And then the cry goes out. He's got Trophimus with him. He's bringing Trophimus into the inner court. Now let's read what this sign says, because it's intense. I haven't seen signs like this. I've seen one, and I'm going to tell you about that, but it's pretty intense. This is what it reads. The translation: no stranger is to enter within the balustrade round the temple and enclosure. Whoever is caught will be responsible to himself for his death, which will ensue. That's what it says. It says it in Koine Greek and in Latin. Now, to be clear, stranger means non-Jew. It means goyim. It
Right.
means Gentile. So this is the thing that you're reading as a Greek, or with the Latin as a Roman, as you're getting really close to that sorig, which is that fencing that as it goes into the inner court. Paul passes through that, and a huge riot ensues because of these things they're saying. This man's teaching men not to circumcise. If you're not circumcised, that prima facie means that you're Gentiles. He's teaching the Gentiles. He's doing this. He made a lot of accusations of that nature against Paul, and this caused a huge problem for him. So such an action, if true, would be punishable by immediate death. The sign posted there at the entrance explains this with very calm intensity. I've never seen a sign like that but one time in my life. I know you guys, you know Christ Church, right? Over there in Nevada. You've
Yeah,
been out
yeah,
there,
it's good
obviously.
folks over there. Yep.
Yeah, great folks. Um, when my brother was baptized into their denomination. And as we were passing by there, he said, "Hey, have you ever been to the back gate of Area 52?" And I said, "No, I haven't been to the back gate of Area 52." We were going back over to Utah. He's like, "Let's go down there and see what's going on down there." I was like, "First of all, are we going to be okay down there?" He's like, "Sure, you're allowed to be down there. People camp out. As long as you don't pass the gate, should be fine." We're going down the road, which is approximately 6 miles. It's a right turn off the highway, 6 miles down. And then all of a sudden, way up in the distance, I see this gleaming white truck come up all the way on top of a bluff.
Bro.
We driving further, this big Apache. It looks like an Apache. I don't know what it is, but it's one of those military copters, those black ones, comes hovering about 60, 70 yards off the ground down the road towards us. Now, this doesn't make what we're doing illegal, but what it was a show. It was basically saying, "We don't register you guys. You're not wanted out here. We're just going to let you know. You get up
They
to
were
that area."
flexing.
Wait, have you been out there?
Yeah, yeah. I did a survey close to there once and kind of crapped my pants up once
Well, I
almost
went
because
out
of
there.
something very similar, Josh. Um,
So I went out there with him, and I'm sitting there at the gate on the right side of the correct side of the gate, and I'm reading some of these warnings, and it's just like the Sorig warnings, pretty much. It says don't step over this gate. Don't come out here. If you don't have business out here, it's going to lead to everything from civil penalties to death. Don't cross here. And there's a guy in a white truck with a shotgun up there. There's guys up in the air. They were so low to the ground I could see guys with automatic light arms on the side by the pilot in the helicopter. I gave him my own special little wave. I was in the passenger seat. My brother was driving. So the Sorig was a very serious thing. It was something people talk about. Hey, don't go into the inner court. Back then, if you did that, it caused a major scuffle, and that's what happened to Paul. He got pulled in, I believe, personally, to it was a political job on him. He walked into the Sorig, everybody knew, and I think they just demonstrated and caused a big ruckus. I don't know that he was bringing Gentiles in there. I don't know if Trophimus really made it in there, but he was preaching non-circumcision, and that probably put him off pretty badly. So they would say he's encouraging Jews to come into beyond the Sorig uncircumcised, which makes them Gentiles. That's the background of this, and it's important because he's going to go before two leaders, Festus first of all, and then over to Agrippa, and they're going to argue back and forth. When he goes to Festus, he's going to appeal to Caesar. Festus is going to say, "Well, let's send you to Agrippa the second." Agrippa the second is going to tell him, he's going to say, "I understand your argument. I understand where you're coming from. I would free you. You would be a free man right now had you not claimed to go before Caesar. But you've claimed to go before Caesar. You claimed it, so to Caesar you're going to go." And that's where we are. This is the background of this. And it's
okay.
important because when we get into the armor of God, we're going to see two passages in here that talk about what I believe, and I think you'll believe, to be temple worship at the very beginning of Ephesians. He's going to talk about the needs of these things, and then he's going to talk about putting on the armor of God, not to wrestle with flesh and blood, but against spiritual adversaries. So the temple is crucial to the Ephesians. And I'm given the background of this. I'm only going to talk about the loins of truth. I'm not going to stomp down anybody else's
Oh, you're
area.
good.
But
Yep.
I'm saying it's important to see that so that you see Paul as he truly is.
Perfect. That's the soup in which he is swimming, so to speak, right now. Is
Yep.
he's not making friends. He's kind of a rabble rouser.
Yeah. Well, when he got in front of Festus, he'd been over with the Greeks, and the Greeks traditionally are some of the best argumentation. That's all they did in the agora. These older
Sure.
men would go to the agora and they would argue, philosophize about everything. They could pick up toothpicks and philosophize with toothpicks. He'd been with those guys for 20 years. And so I think what he did in front of Festus was he probably got into that mode and then said, "Okay, fine, I'll appeal to Caesar." And that's what got him into Rome. So,
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense. All right. Moving on.
Moving on, we're going to go into what I call Roman opinions of Paul. And we're going to do this through two things. It's in the bibliography. I'm just going to kind of speed through this so that we can get to the meat of the matter, which is actually girding the loins with truth. We want to get down to girding and the rest of it. I just want to give you this background. So,
You bet.
to understand the term Christian, you have to understand that at the time of Paul, it's anachronistic. And what that means is that nobody used the term Christian. They would say a follower, a Jewish follower of Rabbi Yeshua. They would say, these are Jews. And these Jews believe that Rabbi Yeshua has fulfilled the covenant of Messiah, of the Messiah. So prior to 110 AD, calling somebody a Christian is anachronistic. All right. It simply was never done. So we have to look at the way Nero sees this. He's saying things like this. He says, wow, 24 years ago, there was this big thing, and there was a leader, and there was a schism, and then we had to put him to death. And then I have the Roman guards coming back saying the Christians never really revolted. It wasn't really them. It was these patriotic types. I don't know what's going on, but there seems to be trouble brewing with the Jewish, with Palestina is what they called it. And so everybody says Nero didn't like Christians. What Nero was handed was a simmering pot of Palestina between two contending ideologies of Judaism. One was to follow the Messiah, who is Yeshua, who's Jesus Christ, and the other were the traditional Pharisaical mosaics. That's how the Romans would have seen him, because they didn't refer to him as Christian or Christoloi or any of that stuff till about 110 AD.
I see.
So that it's important to know that, and that is the growing majority is saying that. So history has kind of slighted Nero, and Nero is not he's not the epitome of virtue. Okay, Nero is not. I'm not trying to bring Nero and put him up on a pedestal. I'm trying to be
You're
fair
not
to him.
you're
But
not trying to make Nero great again?
no. So history. I mean, if you could see how those politics work, his mother. I'm not going to get into history. So that you know, I made history my minor instead of my major or my master's because it's
Mhm.
my passion. I was the guy that
Right.
when the political science teacher would start throwing out things, I would go fact check him. And when he started getting into, because he got into political dialogues, both of them did, I would start pulling out books. I remember one time he started just tearing into Reagan and tearing into all these things. And I was like, I want to know both sides. So I went out and went down to the bookstore, the little five and dime, started pulling out all these real politic books from Nixon and went through and fast read through the blurbs and the rest of it. That's who I am. That's where I was going in my life. But the Lord said, don't be a dried reed. Don't go down that road. Stay in the believer's realm. Don't argue. You see what I'm saying?
Right. Yep. I get you.
This is my passion. So this stuff is my passion. So the term Christian was not used at the time of Nero. So from 60 to 62, Paul is in Rome. All right.
Okay.
Tacitus would write in 120 AD, and Suetonius would write, I believe it's 118 AD, that the Christians were blamed for the burning of Rome. That couldn't happen. What would have to happen is that Nero would say, I know there's trouble brewing in Palestina. They're the biggest rabble rousers in all the empire. It's probably those guys or that virulent sect of Jews called, followers of Rabbi Yeshua. Those guys may have done it, or the Jews may have. There's no proof that he accused Christians of that, except for Tacitus, who was using anachronistic terms like 60 years later.
Okay.
This is important because you're going to see Nero is going to let him go. Nero's going to
Let
let
Tacitus go?
no, Tacitus is a historian in 120. He's going to
That's
let
what I
Paul
thought.
go. He's going to
Oh,
let
okay.
Paul go after his first imprisonment. Then he's going to bring him back after the burning of Rome, and everybody's going to say, oh, it must be the Christians. There are a lot of reasons he would bring him back. And we're going to get into that, and then we're going to get into the girding of the loins with truth. So I
Absolutely.
know I'm talking a lot, but I'm throwing it out. You
No,
guys
you're
have
good.
three
You're
hours.
good. I'm following it. This is good. We're doing just fine.
All right. So it's important. Uh, this is important because we're going to see in this discussion of how to act toward how how to act toward government and the use of military symbology in the writings of the Ephesians. So he's going to be in imprisonment, and he's going to start using military symbology in the writings of Ephesians. It says Rome would become more bellicose against Judea, and history would show that when they say Judea, I mean the Pharisaical Jews. You're going to see that by 67 to 70, before Titus comes in there and just sacks Jerusalem, you're going to see that the Pharisaical side of the Jews became more bellicose than the followers of Yeshua, what you call the Christians. So Rome is
For
trying
those who
to,
don't know, what does the word bellicose mean?
uh, they're going to become aggressive. They're going to say, we have got to go into Jerusalem and sack Jerusalem. And that's going to be in 67. 67 to 70 is going to be what's called the Jewish War. And
Okay.
so I'm positing that Nero is saying, hey, we've got troubles brewing over here. I don't know which is which. They're all Jewish to me, and there's a problem over here. And I'm saying that even after the death of Paul, we're going to see that the Pharisaical Jews, the ones that followed the Mosaic and did not follow Yeshua, we're going to see that the Romans took those guys down as the real target. It'll start with Vespasian,
Mm.
and then it'll end with Titus. They weren't focusing in on Christians. They were focusing in on bellicose, highly patriotic, what you would call Maccabean style level Jewish political rhetoric. So,
They're still looking for that political savior. They're still looking for the guy to
right
come in, restore the kingdom of David, and get the oppressors off their backs.
now you just made my point. Thank you. You basically said when we wrestle not against flesh and blood, we're wrestling against spiritual darkness in high places. We're wrestling against evil and wickedness, and we're doing this stuff, but we're not wrestling against the Roman Empire. We're not taking down the man. None of us are. We're wrestling against our own sins and the sins of others. We need to take on the armor of God. Now, we're going to see that he was basically bound to a Roman soldier called a Praetorian Guard as he was writing or dictating this. So all of those Praetorians that were in that room and on that duty, it was 2 years. All of them would have known about this. So if he was writing down, let's take
Mm.
down Rome, let's burn it to the ground, let's protect the temple site, let's build all of these other highly patriotic sites, he would have had his head cut off a lot sooner. He didn't. He was let go by Nero after the writings of Ephesians. And so I want you to see
Dude,
Ephesians as a non-militaristic, more of a spiritual warfare. It's spiritual
dude,
armor.
that makes so much more sense. Why he used the that that metaphor for the armor, because there's certain parts of that armor, Josh, that wouldn't necessarily be um ubiquitous throughout Jewish culture, right?
The
Um,
bucklers, you got bucklers. Yeah, I'm with you, man. You got bucklers. You've got things going on that don't make sense, but they will make. Yes, I'm with you.
and that's interesting because I think what we're seeing here, whew, this carries some implications because I'm just thinking about this. Like, if Paul is writing this and he's writing about what would be recognizable as Roman armor to Romans, what I can't help but wonder if these aren't the first seeds that are planted within Roman political um, uh, thought, so to speak, that Christianity can be conducive to Rome and
Oh wow.
doesn't seed the ground to for Constantine later. Does that make
You
sense? Because if he's
you're
talking
two
to the
steps ahead
military
of me.
guys,
You're 2 steps ahead of me. Paul not only did that, my humble opinion, and I have it in scripture, is going to say Paul taught every Praetorian Guard that he was bound to and every team. And the reason I know that is I think it's Ephesians 1:13. He says, I am being known by the entire Praetorian Guard. All of the guard knows me. It says it in Philippians, I'm sorry. In Philippians, which
That
he
is
also
fascinating.
he wrote Philippians while he was in his first imprisonment. And he wrote in Philippians 1:13, he says, at the same time Ephesians was being written, it says Paul was, quote, becoming known to the entire guard, which is the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard were 9,000 men that were under the auspices of Caesar. They would be like they would be
The
the
Marines,
commanders. They would
right?
be the highest level military bureaucrat leaders. How do I find their equivalent? Their equivalent would be the military industrial complex, the National Security Agency, blended in with the CIA SEAL Team 6. There's 9,000 of these guys. They're called the Praetorians.
Few months back, Justin Frankham had an idea to make learning about the fullness of the restored gospel a lot easier. It was an idea that once I had my mind wrapped around it, I felt like it could do a lot of good. Mormon Legacy Ministries is a multi denominational ministering effort to provide a safe landing place for Mormons to land until they find their forever church home, while at the same time offering folks an opportunity for worship and fellowship. Here's a little bit of what Mormon Legacy Ministries is offering. Every second and fourth Saturday of the month at 3 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, a sacrament meeting is conducted by Joshua Erickson. Every Thursday at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time is the Gospel Fundamentals class hosted by Elior Walker and Braxton Bogard. Quarterly men's meetings are also held. The next one of those will be Saturday, February 14th at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. There's a women's organization, and to learn more about that, go to MormonLegacy.org and click on that link. Finally, for a limited time, starting February 2nd at 6 p.m. and every Monday after that at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, a discussion group will be held on the book, The 5,000 Year Leap by Cleon Skousen. So, whether you're an independent Mormon fundamentalist or maybe you're a Mormon fundamentalist already in a group, but you want more opportunities to learn and serve, or perhaps you're an LDS person wanting to learn more about what your theological cousins believe, or maybe even you're not a Mormon at all and you're just curious about the faith, Mormon Legacy Ministries is the place for you where you can go to learn all those things from the comfort of your own home over Zoom. To get there, all you need to do is go to MormonLegacy.org and then click any or all of those classes that are being offered there. Again, that's MormonLegacyMinistries.org. Go there today and sign up. And it totally fits Paul's style, right? He's going to tailor his, like when he goes to Mars Hill, he speaks very with a lot of philosophical overtones because he knows that's what's going to land with his audience. So this armor thing, this makes sense given the Praetorian Guard because it's something that the guard would be very familiar with, and it fits Paul's mode of teaching, especially
Absolutely.
when
And
he's in those Hellenistic circles.
these guards were 18 inches away from wrist to wrist. So let's get into Paul being bound in chains, as stated in Ephesians 6:20 at the end. Bound in chains in the Greek is called haleusis. Haleusis is a small chain. It's the Greek word for a small chain that you bind at one wrist. There's an 18-inch small chain that's bound to the wrist of the Praetorian Guard, and they have to do that all day. All day.
Oh,
They would go in cycles of 6 hours, and they would go in probably in cycles of teams, week on, week off, or a couple days on and off. Now you do the math. If you have a team of four for 1 week team of four, that's going to be 200. What is that? That's going to be a team of four for 52 weeks. That's going to be 208 different Praetorian guards for 2 years. 400 Praetorian guards are going to not only know you, they're going to have sat there 18 inches away from you as you're dictating to your friends or writing down the scriptures, and they would be engaging in religious discussion. So these Praetorian guards would be sent throughout Rome. Hey, we're going to need you over in Jerusalem. We're going to need you up in Asia Minor. You need to get up to Philippi over into Greece. You've got to go over here into Spain. They get moved around all the time. So they're going to say, hey, where have you been? Oh, I've been in Rome. What have you been doing? I was bound in chains to a guy named Paul. He's a Jewish man that follows the Rabbi Yeshua, and he wrote these letters. And wow, all he did was talk about God all day. I was there the whole week, the whole month, whatever. He was just talking about God. Paul became known throughout the entire guard, is what it says. everywhere. So when you
Wow.
say this is ideal, this armor of God, he would have been writing and they're looking over there and saying, okay, so the buckler and then the breastplate and then the skirting, but it wasn't about warfare, it was spiritual. So yes, he would have been preaching. I believe what you just said. That it that
Dude,
that
that is fascinating. Because as we were talking, and look, I've already been in talks with someone. This is kind of a general announcement. I'm about to get a producer on the show, so I don't have to Google search my own stuff, and he can keep me straight. He's going to be real good at it. But
okay.
I was just doing some quick research here. There were several members of the Praetorian Guard that ended up becoming Caesar or Emperor of Rome,
Right,
right?
right.
And and if human nature holds across the eons, which I believe it does, then it becomes kind of a no-brainer that at some point this stuff's going, like, I could see those Praetorian guards taking what Paul taught and they become even semi-converted, right? You could see Paul's lecture here or parable about this armor of God almost becoming a badge of honor for these guys, right? And
So
and they're
when
going to internalize that. And they're going to, oh, it makes total sense now, right? This is going to permeate even if they didn't make it all the way to the emperor of Rome. You imagine some are advisors, right? They got emperor's ears, right? And so this really is the seeds I think that are planted that would break things open for when Constantine comes along.
of course these, so that you know how I feel about this, and there are many historians, some may try to disagree, but they know the Praetorian Guard was the equivalent of our military industrial complex.
Mhm.
They decided whether Caesar stayed Caesar or Caesar died because they protected
Right.
him. They had all the positions of authority. There were 9,000 of them. These were battle hardened troops that if you said, this man's an enemy of the state, they didn't talk a long time about that. They said, what? This man's an enemy of the state? You know what happens after that. That's the kind of people that they were. And so when you see somebody like Augustus Caesar ruling as long as he ruled not just, I believe, at the leisure of it, he ruled in the graces of the men that called his Praetorian Guard. And we get the history of him being this amazing, august looking, reticent, stoic looking leader with all of his robes. And he's on his throne in his dais looking down at people. No, you got to see all the guard behind him, all the people throughout the provinces, all the politics. Without that, he would have been a dead man, a full dead man. So these guys are very powerful. And every Roman historian, every teacher would tell you that. They would say at the end, it was the Praetorian Guard running the show. Nero would get rid of his mother, and his mother would be gotten rid of through the Praetorian Guard. That's how that
Yeah.
stuff works. So you're absolutely right. And so what Paul did, I think he did it through inspiration. He says, "Hey, I'm bound in chains to the Praetorian Guard. These guys are going to go, 9,000 of them are going to go all throughout the entire Roman Empire. So guess what I get to do? I've got a captive audience for 2 years. I'm going to write epistles. I'm going to dictate it to my friends. My friends are going to visit and we're going to discuss religion. It would be like you and me. You're bound in chains. I get to come visit you, and we're preaching to the national security framework. That intense.
Interesting.
All right, let's move on because we really got to get to the loins of truth. But there's a lot here, and there's a lot to think about. This is good stuff. All right, let
Do
me
I
see.
need to go forward in photos yet?
Um, I was going to have you. Okay, so that hallucis, there are I don't know if I put it in pictures, but I definitely put it in the bibliography. You'll see there's a scholar who discusses, all he discusses is Roman, uh, the what they do and the policy and the procedure of how they bind people and hold them under house arrest. He's it's in the bibliography, and you'll see it there. So I'm just going to move on past that and down into, we talked about becoming known. So everywhere Paul would go afterwards, they say he went to Spain. Some say he went all the way up into England, into Britannia. Everywhere he go, there would be a Praetorian guard, if not being the prefect, attached to the prefect. And when he was known, hey, did you know Saul of Tarsus, Paul is here? And they say, who's Paul? It would be likely that one of the Praetorian guards would say, hey, my brother Festus was in Rome. He was bound to this guy for like 3 weeks. This guy apparently caused a riot inside the inner court, inside the Soreg, and did this. He would be known everywhere. He wouldn't be able to go
Right.
anywhere without that. It would be like that. His name would be known. He'd be a person of interest, is what we would call him.
Gotcha.
So the background to the doctrines. All right, so let's get into it. Remember how I told you that we talked about he had gotten thrown in chains, imprisoned because he went inside the Sorek apparently, and was and caused a riot or a disturbance. If you look
Right.
at Ephesians 1:13, it talks about a sealing by the Holy Spirit of promise. It's right there in Ephesians 1:13. As you know, the sealings we make by the Holy Spirit of promise are sealings we make in the temple. He's telling all the saints everywhere that they are worthy of that sealing of the Holy Spirit of promise. So he got thrown in prison for apparently attempting to bring strangers into the inner court. And when he beat that charge, he claimed went over to Caesar. He got on and wrote in Ephesians, all of you, as I know, are worthy of that sealing by that Holy Spirit of promise. Now, this is a little teaser, a little insight. He's saying, you people are worthy of the covenants. You are covenant worthy people. And to the Mosaic Jews, it would be like saying, you Gentiles are worthy of this. But as we know, Isaiah prophesied that we would go and disperse into the Gentiles, and we would bring the Gentiles back to the covenant. It's Ephesians 1:13, and you'll be able to see it there. It's kind of a little bit of a teaser. So I'm going to start moving into the direction of that. We're going to talk about temples. We're going to talk about promises and covenants. We're going to talk about the armor of God being the promises to God about certain areas. We're going to be talking a little bit, not a lot, about washings and anointings of certain areas without getting into it. Definitely talk about the blessing of the loins. But before we get to that, I need to reinforce for you. And, I want to get this quick because I want to get to the meat of it. It says, Paul declares that the fight is not with flesh and blood. He would go very far in convincing the Romans that he is not advocating rebellion. He says, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of the world. Then he said, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Do you know where the high places are? Do you know anything about ancient, like the Old Testament, when you say high
The
places?
high places were always just that was temple imagery.
There you. So now that you said that, you made this so easy for me. In the Greek, the high places are called Iperanios. I'm butchering that. It means heavenly or the heavenly realms, which is the Greek version of high places. The high places comes from and later on you'll see that when we have the Hebrew versions of the New Testament, when we do the Hebrew versions of the New Testament, they're going to use certain types of words. It's called Bamromim, and Bamromim means the high places, just like you said, the spiritual high places. It can mean the apostates with all of their groves. It can mean the Holy of Holies in the temple. So he's talking about spiritual wickedness that occurs in high places. What
Gotcha.
happened in the inner court? In the inner court is a sacred place. It's a heavenly or divine place because you're not allowing strangers or Gentiles or unwashed worldly people there. They committed and conspired to throw him out by deception, by conspiracy. There is wickedness occurring in high places. He's saying we stand against these priests that take over these high places, and when they take over them, they don't engage in the covenants. They don't live the covenants. They do spiritual wickedness, deceptions, and cause riots and all the rest of it. He would be talking a little bit about that, but there are other reasons that he's talking about it. The Hebrew version would say that we stand against evil spirits in the high places. That's intense.
Mm.
He's saying because it's been corrupted, there's evil spirits now surrounding the high places. So he's saying
Interesting.
you charged me with bringing strangers and Gentiles in here. I'm charging you with evil spirits in the high places, or at least spiritual wickedness in the high places. So he's getting
You're
his
worried.
goods in.
You're worried about Gentiles. You guys are dragging in demons, so to speak.
So to speak. That's right. So let me I'm going to tease this out and talk about it at some point later on, years down the road. It can mean a high holy area on a mountain or in a temple that has been taken over by quote unquote what John and Jesus would call the children of darkness, the brood of vipers, the serpents, the children of the devil, Satan's seed, or as Jesus and John the Baptizer and the Essenes, the Qumran communities would have called the transplanted Pharisee temple priests. So there were original temple priests called the seed of Zadok. They went out and started communities and tried to bring about the pure or the righteous, called the Essenes. These people, John especially, called the Pharisees at the temple a brood of vipers. That is a direct quote from his writings. He said, "You are broods of vipers." Jesus would call them children of darkness, servants, children of the devil, the seed of the devil, or Satan's seed. And he would do that to the Pharisees that came from those areas. So I'm trying
I,
to set this. I'm trying to set
I
this up a little bit the way they would have seen it.
I just want to be clear here. There is a doctrine called serpent seed, which basically says that Eve had intercourse with the devil, and that's where Cain came from. But we're not talking about
We're
that,
not
right?
talking about
This is all.
Lilith.
This
We're
is
not
all.
talking
This is.
about Lilith.
You're right. This is all just figurative.
So what happens when you don't have the authority anymore? When the authority goes with John the
Right.
Baptist through his father out to the Essenes, and they're out there in the wilderness, crying in the
Right.
wilderness in camel hair. You've got all the authorized ones out there and the non-authorized. All of a sudden, all this spiritual evil spirits in the high places start coming in. I'm trying to give you a
Gotcha.
flavor of John and a flavor of the
Yep.
Essenes. I'm trying to give you that because Paul is going to be taking it from the Gentiles' perspective, and he's going to be saying, we stand against spiritual wickedness in high places. John the Baptist would say, I stand here and baptize you into the kingdom of God. The Messiah is coming, and I'm not worthy to unloose his latch. And they say, but what of the Pharisees? And he says, they are a brood of vipers. That feeling and that flow from that era. I just want you to feel.
Right.
I'm not
Okay.
trying to take on, so that you know, I'm not trying to take on any. I family history wise, and I've told you this, I don't want to get into it too much because I'm more for the remnant of Israel than I am for anything else. But I am not badgering my brethren who are Judaistic or Mosaic in their outlook. I'm not
Right.
looking to vie against the Jewish. I'm saying be like Paul, be like
Yep.
John, be like
Yep.
Jesus, and come to the true covenant. I'm not saying let's go bash the
Right.
Judaistics. I'm not
Right.
that. I'm 12% Ashkenazi, and I'm not using that for any other reason. Probably putting a probably putting a bullseye on my back now, but I have a family history with that. But the real Israelites to me are the ones that Jesus said they're the remnant. They're the one that you and I are going to go to. We're probably part of that. So anyway, I don't want to turn this
Oh,
into a
you're good. You're
anti-Judaic.
good.
So now let's shift gears. All right. So like I said, as we switch gears, I want to dive in to, I think I told you, just want to make sure. The Hebrew translation of these high places is Bamromim. And again, I'm chopping that up probably pretty brutally, but it's the high places. It really is the high places. So we're now talking about, I believe, a temple covenant level of armor. And so I want
Okay.
to take us into the temple covenant level of armor. And to do that, we need to kind of explore two different sayings. One saying is a direct quote from Paul. It's gird the loins, as to what
Mm-hmm.
that means, and distinguish that from girding up the loins. So girding up the loins versus gird the loins. Because the quote here isn't gird up your loins with truth. It just says gird the loins with truth. And I'm going to go through that. And then we're going to end by talking about how we cover our loins with truth. And then we'll end it here. And I'm hoping we can do it in a
Fine.
not a speedy fashion, but in a good clip.
Whatever it takes, we're good.
If I were to ask you, say, what do you think is the most popular, and not by population, but by length of time, the most popular type of garment, just a single garment, most popular for the longest amount of history, what would you think that was? Would you think it's blue jeans, or what would you think?
Well, fortunately, it wasn't bell bottoms, so we have that going for us.
Yeah,
So I would say probably, and given what we're talking about, I would say the loincloth
the
or
loincloth. Absolutely. I'm going to focus on the longest running loincloth they have, which is roughly a 2,000-year fashion statement. It was used for 2,000 years in variant forms, but the form maintained its basic. It had went everything from just a piece of cloth hanging down in front of the genitals, but the most used one, you have to turn. They had them definitely in ancient Sumeria. They obviously had them in Acadia and other areas of these places, but the longest running that I could find was the Egyptian shenty. It's a Everybody that watches TV knows what a shenty is. It's a fancy name for a kilt, basically.
okay.
Let's open up some of those pictures and you'll see where are we
So
at.
here I'm showing, I think it's the Egyptian one. It looks like black marble and it's missing a leg.
Yeah, that was a statue of a shenty. Let's go ahead and let me see. Loins of Truth. Let's go to the shenty. Okay, and then
So that's the one in Egypt. I'm showing the one on the Egyptian hieroglyphics.
the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and then it shows a couple of lighter skinned gentlemen in an equivalent of a shendy.
Yep.
So it's
Got
a
it right
wrap.
here. It's up. Yep.
So could you believe that for 2,000 years, roughly, from the old kingdom of Egypt through the new kingdom, so we'll say anywhere from about 1,300 years to roughly 2,000, that this was the prime wrap, loincloth wrap for people in Egypt. It ran the longest that we know of. Now, I'm not getting into a cross cultural because I'm sure that we could find robes that lasted long, long, long time. But I'm talking about girding the loins type of a garment. What would last the
Right.
longest? It would be this. So
Okay.
this is a wrap. Let's kind of go through this really fast and let's just kind of think together. The shendig, or the loincloth, was used in ancient Egypt for three purposes. First, it was to cover the loins. So they had everything from a basic, just a cloth that would go down. There was a lot at the slave class that some of the slaves weren't even entitled to wear a garment. The very simple slaves, or even the more cultured slaves, were allowed a shendig, just a garment that goes around the loins to cover it. House and domestic servants, high domestic servants, they would look like these two Caucasian looking men. They would be wearing either that or the Egyptian hieroglyphic version of it. That's what they would wear.
Okay.
So if you were a servant, if you look at the things that I'm showing you, do you see any belts anywhere? What do you see? Is it just a wrap?
It's just a wrap. That's all
It's
I'm
just a
seeing.
wrap. It's absolutely a wrap. So historically, and I've provided in the bibliography the books on this, there are two. One focuses on archaeological. She's very good at that. She does a very good job. And the other one goes through and analyzes the hieroglyphics and the writings and the paintings and the carvings. But there was a distinguished difference between what you would call domestic or house slaves or house servants. We'll call them servants, and those that engaged in heavy, heavy labor or even in
Hmm.
warfare, like soldiers. So as you look through this, you'll notice that there were belts that were either wrapped in or tied around that would gird this shendig. But if you were a house or
Mm,
domestic, if you were a house or domestic, you would have been wrapped and tucked without a belt. So a girding is a belt. It's a cincher. It's a tightly bound, usually leather. It can be other materials, but it's not a wrap. It's actually a girding of a wrap. So, and
interesting.
I'm gonna walk through this kind of simply kind of like a Descartesian methodology. So now you're a house domestic servant and you're working inside the house and you're taking things, you're washing people's feet at the door, you're going out and you're shopping for the foodstuffs, bringing them back from market. You're going to look like these two, basically these white, all of these people that don't have any girdings on. You'll be doing that. But
Just hanging out in your wrap.
hanging out in your wrap. But let's say that you are an overseer for Pharaoh's farms or his stone quarries or something like that that requires a little bit more exertion, almost a quasi-military role. Do you think that they would just do wraps like this, or do you think they put censures and belts on them?
I think you'd a couple things, right? I think first off, you'd probably want something a little heavier than just a wrap, right? So I'm thinking leather, a belt to make sure it stays in place. You're going to be doing a lot more than just carrying home the groceries, right? So you're going
Right,
to want to make sure that stuff stays in place. If we go to the next picture here, which is the looks like the Roman kind of armor there, so to speak,
right.
around the waist, that's what I would imagine that would be more like.
Okay, so in Egypt, yes, the Roman armor, it's let me I don't want to mispronounce this stuff. It's called pterygies. They're called pterygies. That those they're leather. They're basically leather straps that come down, and there would be a lot more than the picture you saw. They would actually be folded in back and forth to protect the loins in battle. But the Egyptian version, if you worked out in the fields as a field hand, or let's say you're at your house and you're relaxing, and you're in your shenty, you're in your kilt or your wrap, and you have your wrap on, and all of a sudden the supervisor of your battalion comes in and says, "We're going to war." What do you think that the fastest way to convey that to a person would be if you walked up to a fellow soldier who's relaxing at his house in a neatly tucked shenty and just engaging in domestic activities, and you have to tell him, "Hey, we need to assemble and we need to go out into the field to assemble because we're going up into the Hittites. We're going to fight the Hatti up in the plains of Israel." How do you think they would say that?
Gird up your loins.
They would get rid of the up and they would just say gird the loins. So
Okay.
now you're working out in the cattle fields and you're pulling steer around and you're a supervisor of those cattle and you have to bring the men out and say, "Hey, we're going to be moving the cattle a couple of miles down the way. It's going to go through a bunch of gates. We've got some properties here and it's going to cross a small creek." How do you think that they would tell them that they're going to exert hard work that day? What would they tell those people at the night before at their house? "Tomorrow we're going to do this, so
Gird up your loins.
gird the loins." They would say, take a belt, wrap your wrap in that belt, gird the loins." The
It's
Egyptians wouldn't use the up version, and we're going
right.
to explain that because the Israelites traditionally distinguished themselves from Egyptians. If they were free, not slaves, if they were free, they had robes. And so we're going to get
Got
into
you.
the girding up of the loins, which is a different phrase. So I want you to see it. I want you to see this kind of muscular looking leader of an army walking into his battalion group or passing by the homes of his captain. And all he does is he talks to Neferitu, and Neferitu, gird the loins. And he looks up and he knows exactly what that means. Okay, he wants me to put a girding loincloth on. I'm probably going to bring my arrows, get the war chariot, and have a couple spears ready. That's what gird the loins means to them.
Okay.
The supervisor of the cattle or whatever it is comes in and says, "Hey, it's not going to be a light day today. It's going to be a tough day. Gird the loins."
It's ancient time to put on your big boy pants.
Put on the big boy pants, gird it with the belt. Now, I want to put I want to put a pin in this because remember that slaves and domestics would not have girdings. They would just have simple wraps.
Right.
Put a pin in this because we're going to come back and around to it, okay?
Okay.
You just remind me, say, "Hey, remember how you said that the domestics only had wraps and they were only, especially the slaves, all they had was one piece of clothing and it was a shendik or a wrap or a loincloth."
Right. Yep.
All right, let's go back to there. So, as you and I already stated, we've been over this. The Roman pterygies, The Roman pteryges is a protection of the loin area using plated or on top of one, on top of another, below another. And in some cases, they would do three stack, but they would gird the loins all the way around with these leather straps that would have weighted bolted metals to keep it down. This would stop swords from slicing and cutting because it would hit that rawhide, that heavy hide. And I don't know if it was rawhide, but it was heavy hide, and it would stop the cuttings for it. That's how the Romans, that the Praetorian Guard, when they were bound to Paul, when he'd say,
Gotcha.
gird the loins, they would say, oh man, yeah, we don't have them on today. We've just got our Roman skirt or tunics. But yeah, look at them out there on the fields of Mars. You can see them in their pteryges. They've girded the loins. That would have been what they would have saw when they said, having your loins girt about with truth. They would say, okay, we girt with the pteryges, and he's girding the loins to protect the loins, and that's the pteryges. So yes, the Romans had their version for battle. And as you see, the pteryges had those belts. All of them had a belt cincher that would hold that thing on so that they weren't loose.
Check.
Okay, so it's incredibly important to see that the girding of the loins means that the loins are held tight around by a wrap. It's not loose. It's not
Check.
domestic. Now you remember how I said I was going to come back to the point of the domestics.
Yes.
What year? You remember Joseph of Egypt?
Yes.
Joseph
Well, I
of
mean, not
Egypt
personally,
sold,
but
but well, one day we will. He's definitely our
right, right.
granddad. We're both. I would assume we're both. We're both Ephraim.
From
So, Grandpa Joseph of Egypt was sold into slavery into Potiphar's house. And while in Potiphar's house, he was a slave and a domestic and a butler. The chief butler is what they said.
right.
He hung out as a domestic at the house, as a slave. How many garments do you think he would have? One, two, three? How many would he have?
I have no idea, man.
As a slave, he would have one. He would have one
Okay.
garment. It would be a shentig, and he's not royalty, so they wouldn't have the nice plated ones like you see Pharaoh wearing later in the later kingdoms. It would be a wrap. So now I just want to tease out this idea. I'm giving you some insight. Remember Potiphar's wife?
Yes.
Potiphar's wife made several advances against Joseph, and being young and inexperienced, he just pushed her away. She cornered him one time. She cornered him and said, lay with me. And he's saying, how can I do this great evil? They said she grabbed upon his garment. She grabbed upon his
Um,
garment, and he's a slave. He only has one. That garment, do you think it was girded up as a domestic and a slave? It was not girded up.
Probably
Probably.
not.
And as he ran away from her, she would have had a hold of it sufficient that it would have fallen off. And our dear grandfather would have been running through the house commando or in the buff. I don't want to be rude about it. He'd be
Sure.
running about the household in the buff. She would be holding on to an incriminating piece of evidence that she would have to do something about. And she began to scream. She said, behold, behold, I have the garment of the man that tried to violate me, or however she said it.
Check.
This is why the girding, and he didn't have a choice. The reason I'm telling you this is had he had a girding, which he wouldn't have had as a slave, but let's say he was in the higher echelons, like later on when he became viceroy. If he had girdings about his loins, had Potiphar's wife grabbed onto him and he ran, it would have been very unlikely that she would have had a hold of his garment at the end of the day. Do you see the difference?
Right. Yep.
So look
Nope.
at
I
this.
see.
So when you gird the loins, you gird the loins with truth. And in the case of Potiphar's wife, had those loins been girded, we would have a much different story than him going to possibly, we don't know, of him going to jail for all those years. So gird the loins. Did you see the depth of that? Gird the
Yep.
loins.
I do.
So he didn't have a choice. I'm not saying that he did that on purpose. He was domestic and probably right around the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, end of the first or the Old Kingdom. So now we're going to get to where I wanted to go, and I'm happy to do this. Let's talk a little bit about girding up the loins, and I know most LDS know about this. So can you share? I'd like you to, because share with us what girding up the loins means to an Israelite uh, under the Mosaic law.
Dude, I girding up the loins
So you're
in
now taking
the
the loins and you're girding it up. Do you know? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Do you know what it means?
not exactly. Why don't you illuminate that?
Okay. So in ancient Israel, it's going to be in the areas of Exodus, and I have a picture of all the chapters. It'll be Exodus, I believe, 28, parts of 29. There'll be some in Numbers, Judges, First Samuel. They talk about all the holy clothing. But of all the clothing, there are two pieces of clothes, especially at the time. All right, let's move it back a little bit further. Have you had a chance yet to read the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible?
I parts of it. I haven't gone through the whole Bible, right? I've hit the highlights,
So the
the
King
ones
James
that I know
version,
for sure he changed.
the King James version has this, but nothing makes it more clear to us than the King James version. I mean, some of those passages are so beautiful. You got Genesis 14, Genesis 50 is incredible because he predicts the birth of both Moses and Joseph Smith Jr. Both of them
Right.
in JST 50. But what I'm bringing up here is oh, it just went right out of my head. I'll get back to it. I'll get back to it. But there are two types of clothing that the Israelites would have worn. They would have been shepherds in Egypt.
Hmm.
Pharaoh and all of the ruling classes looked down on shepherds. They were considered an abomination to Egyptians. So if you came into Egypt and said, "Hey, what's your profession?" and you said, "I'm a shepherd of sheep and cattle," they would go, "Oh, yeah." And they'd look over at Joseph, and Joseph would say, "Hey, we could take him up to Goshen. We could put him in Goshen if you like. They could be," and he goes, "I'll do you one better than that. Let's have them be the leader of Pharaoh's cattle." He made Joseph the leader of Pharaoh's cattle because he told him he was a shepherd from birth. But they looked down on shepherds. They were considered an abomination to Egyptians. That means rednecks, low class. They look down on them.
Hmm.
Shepherds traditionally wear robes, especially those that are Canaanites that come out of the land of Canaan that we know of as Israel now. They wore robes. In the testaments, in the Old Testament, there are several articles of clothing that discuss these things, but of all of it, there are two. The first is a set of breeches. They're called linen breeches or breeches.
Hmm.
That's what we call them in English. They are called the Mishnah Sahim in Hebrew. And again, I probably tortured that word. You have a picture of that if you want to put it up, you can. These linen breeches were considered a wrap, and if used in tandem with the Godol Kohanites, the Godol Kohan or Kohanim, which are the high priests of the Levites, there are 8 pieces of or articles of clothing for a high priest under the law of Moses. But even concurrent or at the time of the leaving of Israel, it would have been known that the Jews would have distinguished themselves from Egyptians by robes. They would have worn robes. They would have considered loincloths not beneath them, but that would have been Gentile stranger to them. So
Okay.
the free Israelites would have robes. So from the time of Israel, they are told when they want to leave in haste, when you want to run really fast, when you want to have free movement about the loins, they are told to gird up their robes. So they take their robes, they pull them back, they wrap them around, and then there's 2 pieces that they will bring and tie, usually around a belt in the middle, and it will gird up the robe all the way up. It'll gird it all the way up the
Oh,
legs. That's called girding up the loins, and you'll see that it's not exclusive, but pretty much exclusive for our purposes to our people, the Israelites. So now
okay.
when the Israel when Aaron comes out and says Moses says we're ready, gird up the loins. What do you think gird up the loins meant to the Israelites when Aaron came around and said gird up your loins? Moses said we're ready. What does that mean to them?
Probably either they're moving or they're going to war.
They're going to be leaving Egypt very fast. You guys are going to walk not slowly in robes. you're going to be scooting it out of there. And you're going to be doing it with a high hand because you took and borrowed their jewels, because you have to go worship the Lord your God out in the desert, just like Pharaoh said that Moses could. They're going to come out with a high hand holding gold, silver, jewels, rubies, and they're going to wrap or gird up the loins, and they're going to walk fast. They're going to be like, let's scoot this down the road. Let's get 50 clicks, 50 miles down the way before Pharaoh knows what's going on. It's called girding up the loins. So yes, you go to war, you move around really fast, or if you're doing heavy types of work in Israel. A person that would have girded the loins a lot is a priest that we know as Samson. He would have girded up his loins because he would have had that jawbone of the donkey, and he would have gone out and fought people, and he wouldn't have done it in his robes. He would have girded them up around his
Gotcha.
loins, and he would have run around. So now that we know those two phrases, now that we've kind of done a background and we realize Paul's talking at least about spiritual armor and possibly certainly temple ceilings and temple things that started all this, I'd like to get into the final kind of thing here and talk a little bit about the Israelite holy clothing as where we get our Mormon holy garments from. We as you know, we wear holy clothing.
Hmm.
We wear holy clothing. The
Yep.
Israelites were told to wear holy clothing as well. And there are four basic for the priests. There are four basic pieces of holy clothing. There are 8 pieces for the highest of the high priest. They're called the Godol Kohanites, or Kohanim is what they would call it. So let me pull open the Levrim. I've got the breeches there. You're going to want to see this. Okay. So for a high priest, there would be the hosen, which is the tunic. It's the robe. There would be the mishnah the breeches, the linen breeches. There'd be a sash or a girdle, a woven sash, which would serve as a belt. And there'd be the miznephet, which is the mitre or the headdress that we know. It's kind of
Right.
back then it was a tall turban looking thing.
Yep.
Now, for the high priest, they would add to that an additional ephod, which was an embroidered apron garment. They would put what they called a koshen, which is a breastplate. And then they have the meal, the robe, and the tziz, which is the golden forehead plate. It would look like a tiara. They have this gold tiara that goes right underneath their mitre that says "Holy to the Lord," and it would be a gold plate on there. So those are the very highest of their priests, but all the priests would have worn at least 4. I want to talk about, because you asked me to talk about, the loins. The loins are girded about by the Mishnah Sahim, the breeches, what you would call the lower portions of your garments. I know that you're a onesie, but because I'm an independent, I wear the earliest form of Joseph Smith had. They're basically they're breathable cotton long johns, 2-piece, with all the marks in them. So the Mishnah Sahim, the breeches, are what cover the loins. That's what the Jews would cover their loins with, especially the priests. And there are a lot of reasons that they would do it. And the reasons that they would do it is to provide holiness. Holiness to the Lord is the reason that they wore these holy clothing. Purity
Hmm.
and chastity. The Mishnah Sahim, and even now they wear it. If you were to have a close enough relationship with a very pious leader amongst the Jewish community, and they somehow would talk to you about the Mishnah Sahim, it would be private conversation. They would tell you things like the Mishnah Sahim, the breeches, actually they atone for sexual impurity. If you get certain fluids on you that are natural to living in a married capacity, the Mishnah Sahim, after you've cleansed yourself ritually, they purify and atone for any impurities that are upon you. They believe in spiritual purity. It's called ritual. So when you become defiled, there are spirits around you that are defiled spirits. You got to get rid of them through ritual purification. The Mishnah Sahim,
Mm.
the breeches, get rid of those impurities. And that's in the Talmud. That's Judaic thought, and it's very old, very old. So we as LDS, whom I believe are the lawful heirs to the covenant, we are the seed of Zadok that's been scattered amongst the Gentiles. We have our own holy clothing patterned after this. And we also have our temple clothing, which is almost identical, save only the taziz, the golden forehead plate, the tiara forehead plate. That's the only thing we're missing. We have everything, and we've had it for hundreds of years. Okay,
Right.
we're going to get into the Mishnah Sahim, the breeches. We're going to talk about clothing or covering the loins with an armor of God. And this is where I wanted to go. This is where we were always going. Do you remember the washings? Do you remember
Yes.
what was said? Do you remember the loins?
Yes.
Okay. I don't want to get on into this online because this is a podcast with a lot of people, most notably, we'll have members, but, Gentiles that can get confused. Remember those blessings when I tell you that your posterity is the truth of your loins. There are,
Hmm.
there are, there are other truths. There's intimacy, there's love, but intimacy and love are tools for a posterity.
Right.
The posterity is what the Lord wants. And if you go into the final covenant, power in the priesthood, I'll leave it at that. That final covenant at the veil, it's going to be upon you and upon your posterity. And I'm saying that the truth of your loins, the very, very truth of your loins, is the raising up of righteous posterity to the Lord, even to the Father. You're plurally married, so you are under the guidance of raising up posterity to the Father. That's where you are in your plural capacity. I'm saying you asked me to come here and to talk about the loins of truth. For you, the loins of truth is Asher. That's the loin of
Hmm.
truth. That's the exact truth of your loins, and you are clothed about to that purpose by covenant. I've spent so much time trying to get us here. I'd like to spend a couple minutes here either answering questions or talking to you about that. But I testify to you that if you gird your loins about with truth, then you will raise up a posterity to the Father. I further testify to you that that can and only will be done according to plural celestial marriage. That is not a cut to monogamists. That is a hopeful expectation included within myself. I'm a lone man up here in the wilderness up in Alaska, yet I believe, and I'm saying to girt your loins with truth is to fully activate those cleansing blessings of the washing. And then the garment that was provided to you to cover your loins for that specific truth. And the law of chastity is an absolute commandment for that. We can't get close to the veil unless we make those chastity vows. And chasteness is not celibacy. It's to raise up posterity to the Lord. I wish that we were in the temple right now. I would tell you my whole heart. I would tell you everything about it. But I want every listener to understand that chasteness is the raising of posterity to the Father. It is not celibacy. Celibacy is chastity prior to that arrangement, but after that arrangement, it's the raising of the seed to the Father. And it's been specified in our holy works. In the Book of Mormon, it says, if the Father desireth, or the Lord desireth to raise up seed to the Father, then it is, and it's been in our Doctrine and Covenants and in all of our sacred writings. But I'm saying that the first thing Paul talked about was the loins of truth. And he talked about it having been thrown out of a temple by a brood of vipers that tried to use conspiracy, cabal, and deception to confuse the public. They threw him out of a temple. He sat down with the Roman Praetorian Guard, used this metaphor, and the first thing he said is he said, gird the loins with truth. Know that you are bringing a holy seed, a posterity to the Lord on this earth through your faith. And brother, I've pretty much said everything I've needed to say tonight. Is there anything else you want to talk about with me?
You kind of took it the same direction I was going to. So I think we're on to something. I want to say this in no uncertain terms so everybody understands. Look, if you got kids under the age of about 13, you might want to stop here until it's just the adults in the room because we're going to talk about a few sensitive things here. Okay, hopefully you heeded that. So there's a man I go to church with in Missouri who says that with each priesthood advancement or ordinance, you can't sin as cheaply, meaning that if you mess up bad after taking covenants, the repercussions will be more severe without the atonement and without sincere, humble repentance. So if you are a threat to the adversary's plan, if you've taken those covenants, you can bet you'll be a target. Now, we our absolutely in a spiritual war. It's not a physical war. Nobody pick up any weapons. This is a spiritual war we're talking about. If this spiritual war was a chess game, he wants to take you off the board. And look, he's not dumb. He is good at his job. One of the ways he gets people off the board is by sexual temptation. It's a strong feeling that has the ability to cloud our judgment. And this is not a new thing. He has been doing this for as long as there have been people of God trying to do the right thing. We only have to look back at the Old Testament, at the old gods, right? Let's just say that in Israel, you have a piece of ground that, or, let's just say you're in a bit of a drought, right? For whatever reason, you decide to skip the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and go straight to like Canaanite gods, which is what Israel did. So first they would turn to Baal. And they would part of the thing they would do is that they would turn their fields back feral. And that was kind of like an offering, right? When that didn't work, then they would go into something way darker, which was essentially like, and I even hate saying they were ritualistic orgies. And it was done usually under the name of Ishtar, Isis, Inanna. They're the same goddess. They're just in different representation. And she was known for being able to shift between genders, like should start sounding kind of familiar. And so they would have these ritualistic orgies, and the only rule was you just couldn't be with your spouse, essentially. And then what would end up happening always is that you would get unwanted pregnancies from that. Because in ancient Israel, who the dad of that baby is carries a lot of weight. It still does today. And so if you're not sure of the parentage, you're kind of, a little stumped here, right? Well, not to worry, those priests have a fix in mind. And as the conditions would deteriorate, drought would turn to famine and people were hungry, they would then offer up children as a sacrifice to the god Moloch. And that was supposed to incur favor from the gods and end the famine. So we have to ask the question, that can't be going on today, right? Well, I disagree. If we look at the modern environmentalist movement, they want to move people from the country into the cities. And why? So they can turn the land back feral, because people are bad and people mess up the environment. Then if we just look at what's going on in the cities, right? To me, it looks like a lot of if it feels good, do it, right? All inhibition on sexual activity is thrown out the window. And what's the result? Yeah, unwanted pregnancies. And so they refer back to killing the innocent through abortion. Now, what was the end result in Israel? It was less food, it was a collapsed family unit, and it was the death of the next generation. What will be the outcome here for us? 2,000 years, 3,000 years later, it's going to be pretty consistent. It's going to be less food, collapse of the family, and the abortion / death of the next generation. See, the adversary, he doesn't care if you invoke the names of the ancient Canaanite deity. He is far more concerned with getting you to practice what was done back then. So we as a society at large are still worshiping them. The only difference is that it's been repackaged for modern consumption. But despite the names, the results are still the same. Hunger, a collapsed family unit, and death always waits at the door. Always. One of the ways he will do that to men especially, again, not exclusively, but especially, is through sexual temptation.
Absolutely.
And we live in a day and age now where you want to find illicit images, you don't have to go look, and they'll come to you. They'll come to you. You want to be tempted in the flesh, that too will happen. And so it's going to become extremely important that you guard the sacred powers of procreation to be used only within the bounds that the Lord has set.
Yeah.
Because the second you do that, the second you cross that line, especially if you've taken out covenants, you're off the board, at least for a little while till you can fully repent. And so I think as we go forward here, and I love what you said about girding your loins with truth, is the is both having children as well as the raising of that posterity up in the truth of God, to teach them to go after those covenants that we've made in the temple. To present a posterity to the Lord that you have worked endlessly for, even if they've decided to come along or not.
I feel to say and agree with you. If you laden yourself down with sexual sin, you throw that sin upon your children. And that's known in the Bible. So what you're
Yep.
doing is those sins don't just lay upon your spirit or your fabric or the energy upon you which your life sustains. It passes and flows to your children. It talks about children born of fornication. They call them children of wrath. And it talks about other types of things. And we've talked about how spiritual warfare is what Paul's talking about. If you take loosely your covenants and expect to raise seed up to the Lord, what you're doing is ladling temptation upon future posterity with your mistakes. We see it with David and Solomon. David chooses Solomon. I mean, you can see it's called the sins of the father, sins of the children. Now, we don't believe that children will be responsible for their parents' sin, but I do believe that there are intergenerational posterity. The problem can be overcome through Christ, but it is latently there. If you want to go out and be promiscuous and expect your children to take the covenant seriously, you're in for a rude awakening. You have to obey the law to raise them up to the Lord, to have them take it as seriously as you do. Children are so unique and smart. They will smell out intention over words each time. They will know, do as I say, not as I do. They will watch you. They will see you in the garage. They will hear you. They will feel you. They will know what you're saying as you're going down the road. They're going to say, Dad says this. Dad does this. I'm doing what Dad does because I love Dad. And I
Yep.
agree with you, man. If we're going to step it up, I also further believe that people need to gear their desires to the procreation and the raising up of seed, which means they need to step it up a little bit so that the desire is geared in that direction when it comes. When they say, this is a woman that's very, very alluring to me, and you say, that's fantastic. Why? Why? And you go, well, there is no what is the reason? Because if the reason is long term, forever, then you're going to have the right point of view. And it all blends in, the physicality and the rest of it. So I love what you're saying. The saints do need to do that. And it is the fastest way to get you sidelined is sexual sin. The Lord took down one of the greatest of our kingly prophets, David. He had salvation, but he lost his exaltation because of his nonsense. He lost
Yeah.
his wives.
Yeah.
And the
No,
Lord will do that. No joke, straight up. Nathan came in and said, boom, here's the lamb, here's this, here's that. Your wives are gone. You know?
100%. And look, we're in a time now where we're dealing with more than just, I can't even believe I got to say this, more than just normal sexual temptation. We got all sorts of stuff out there now, right? And there's no doubt if we look at what's happening with the LGBTQ agenda, and I want to be careful here because there are people who struggle with those feelings of same-sex attraction, and to them I have sympathy and my heart goes out to them. But nonetheless, I do believe that there's an overall agenda at the top that is pushing this, and they want to absolutely destroy the family without question. And look, this is not a new tactic. It's not at all, as I just showed.
Absolutely. I don't have a problem with what you're going to say. My first point was going to be in the book of Jasher, it talks about some awful things that the men in Sodom tried to do to the angels and messengers to Noah. And it talked about their society at large. Their society was a gaslighting, narcissistic, hypersexual, society that took such great liberties that expectations of sexuality were placed on total strangers that passed into a city. Now, I do believe that there are people that struggle with same gender attraction, but this society is quickly getting into that book of Jasher moment with Sodom and Gomorrah, where expectations are being made on people and such. Second, let me tell you that I agree with you fully. I wrote a book called Supper of the Great God, where I basically said what you said. Here's the thing. There are three things you have to do to offend the Holy Ghost and you'll have no forgiveness in this world and no forgiveness in the next. You have to know the Lord personally. You have to deny, it's four things actually. You have to deny the Lord, set him up to open shame, and then you have to kill innocence. Now let's just walk through for a minute what you said. You have to be a covenant knower of the Lord. You have to begin to take those things lightly, then mock the Lord and turn against him, set him up to open shame, and then you have to murder innocent life. You just specified where the covenant of Israel did it in ancient Egypt, in ancient Ephraim, which are our parentage anciently, the northern kingdom. That's what they did. They took their covenants, said, we're having a bad crop this year. All right, let's put a statue up and call it the Lord of the Harvest. We'll call it Baal. The Lord of the Harvest is up. Let's let the fields go fallow. Well, that ain't working. You know, Jezebel, she says if you go down to the temple tonight, they'll get all of the harvest up and running by getting everybody procreative and excited, and then the land will get excited, and then it'll yield its fruit because we're having an orgy. Well, that sounds weird. Just go do it. Everybody's doing it. Unwanted pregnancy. Pretty soon, high priests have denied the Lord, turned away from the Lord, mocked the Lord, and now they're killing their own babies. The Holy Ghost, the way you offend him is you turn from the Lord after having known him, set him up to open shame, and then murder innocent life in token of the Savior Jesus Christ. That's crazy. And you just basically defined it as sexual libertines. And I agree with you. I agree with you. I didn't want to make it that intense, but I did want to say I do believe that there are people that do struggle with same gender attraction, but we are quickly approaching a time where hypersexuality and then hyper expectation of others, you got to be on board with this, man. You got to be on board. It's like, I don't need to be on board. I need to be tolerant, but I don't need to be on board with this. That's the problem we're having. We're having that big problem. Anyway, sorry, we're agreeing
No,
on a lot of levels.
you're good. And look, I made allusions to this last year on the podcast. It was right after I took my trip back east with Amber to celebrate our 30th, and I mean, we saw a lot of places. And I knew at that point, I'd seen some things at that point where I was like, okay, I said it. I just made a short little 5-minute thing saying, hey, there's not going to be a real episode today, but I wanted to get on and talk to you. And I said, don't worry, I'm going to keep talking about Mormonism, but the seasons have changed for me. And I feel like now it is time to just call the spade a spade and understand. And that is the point of this series on the Armour of God, is that we are there. And look, I'm going to say something else. It's not enough for you to gird up your own loins. If you're a mother or a father, a husband or a wife, you have to ensure that those that you love around you are putting on their armor, because we're there.
Yeah.
There,
Yeah.
look, if you're able to withstand the temptations, fantastic. Good job. You got there. Now you got to worry about your kids. Because the other thing is, if Lucifer can't get to you, he will get to your children. I can't remember which movie it was. Years and years ago, I saw this movie, and the villain was talking to the hero, or the villain was kind of talking to himself, and or maybe it was somebody else. I can't remember. But anyway, the statement was made: you can't defeat them physically. You go after the heart, right? You go after their emotions, right? Lucifer can't get to you. It's fine. It's fine. He'll go after your children. So we have to be so careful now. And we have to spend that time to truly prepare our children, because the enemies, you don't have to find them anymore. There was a time, look, Josh, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 56 years old.
Okay, I'm 48. So we're about 8 years apart. Same generation, essentially. If you wanted to find a smutty magazine or if you wanted to look at smut when you were a kid, it was a chore, right? You were going to have to go down to probably the local convenience store, find the local wino, pay him to buy you a dirty magazine. Okay. We live in a day now where you don't have to look for it. It'll find you, and it'll find you right in the privacy of your own home through your phone without anybody else seeing. And that's just where we're at. And so now we have got to be cognizant of that. And part of that girding up, protecting that area of the body, spiritually and physically, is teaching our children to be on the lookout for it. And then if it does find them, teach them to get out of there as quickly as they can, because
Let me take
we're there. And the more that the adversary can take good people off the board, the more chances he has to run around and really cause havoc.
let me take it a step further because I take a practical approach to this. If you're young and you have desires, we cannot be fulfilling our desires online with whoredoms. We cannot. There's no, the greatest gift that we're given and the penultimate gift of our priesthood is the renewing of our flesh. It's resurrection. The power and the covenant of our priesthood is to the renewing of our flesh. There is no renewing of the flesh in whoredoms. It's one of the fastest ways to take yourself off the track of magnifying your priesthood or the oath and covenant of the priesthood. And so what I'm saying is if you have desires in that regard, if your desires are to women, they should be to good women that love you and you love them, that want to raise up a posterity. It shouldn't just be the desire of women, which we all have. It should be taking that, honing it, bridling it, harnessing it, and saying, I desire women. And nowadays, I'm telling you, David, saying that you desire women nowadays, it's becoming more and more obsolete, which is crazy. It's crazy. The people don't even want to say I desire women. It's like there's a fear of it that's almost like an HR department fear out in society. But if you do have desire for women, hone that desire for a family, and not just a family, a celestial family, and not just a celestial family, a covenant celestial family. And it doesn't have to be a boring, drab, dusty thing. It's got to be exciting for us. It's the covenant that was all the way back to Adam. I'm on board with you. We're teaching each other the same thing. We're basically talking to all the folks that are listening. If you have desires for women, I don't want you to suborn, pervert, corrupt, or turn away from them. I want you to become moral, clean. I want you to become covenant and go. I would suggest, not I want, I would suggest you go out and engage that into the raising of a posterity to the Lord, because that will take all of your desires and hone them into a good way. I'm not for the destruction of desire. I'm for the direction of it in the
Mm-hmm.
proper direction. And when I say loins girt about with truth, it doesn't say loins girt about with abstinence, or loins girt about with what's that called where they cut everything off, we're not trying to cut
Castration.
off. Yeah, they're not saying gird your loins about with castration. They're saying gird it with truth in the direction. And if I wish we were in a temple where we could talk about the blessing of the loins, where we could talk about the truth of the garment and how it activates and does that. We are a procreative, we are a fruitful multiplying, we are a kingdom of priests and priestesses, or gods and goddesses. I'll be very direct because we are in embryo right now, and we cannot kill our procreative urges and expect to maintain some moral attitude. So all of you
Mm-hmm.
young men and you young women, prepare yourselves and your desires and gear them towards the raising and rearing of seed unto the Father in a covenant home where there's love and commitment to the Lord. That's what I would say. If you want to talk about loins, I would take it in that direction. I think we're both agreed. I agree with you strongly.
You know, I want to say this. We've talked about the bad things that can happen by not being protected in that way. Now I want to talk the blessings of being protected, because I don't like ending things just on a nasty note. Um, When you've entered a relationship, a celestial relationship, you've made that your goal with your wife or your husband or wives, whatever the case is. It's different. And then when you add posterity to that mix, it's way different. I just had a baby after not having one for 20 years. I held that child in my arms in the hospital and I just wept. And I looked at my wife, Tanya, and my love for her. I don't think I could love her any more now than I already do, but I know that's not true. And I feel the very same feelings about Amber. When your relationship, as one of its pillars, is bringing up children and recognizing children as the blessing they are into this world, and you have safeguarded that part of yourself for that purpose, that is where joy is found. That is where you can have true peace.
Do it. The temple itself, the Lord actually speaks to animals and says that they might find joy in their posterity. He says it to the animals as well as to the
Yes,
humans. Finding joy
yes,
in your posterity. Please don't edit this, even if it.
that's exactly where I was going. The Lord's last command or last bit of instruction to Adam before he leaves the garden and leaves Adam and Eve in the garden is to have joy and rejoicing in your posterity. I am here to witness in the most personal of ways and testify that you will find no greater joy than when you hold your child in your arms that first time. And then as you get to teach that child and spend time with that child and watch that child grow, and even go through the hard times with them when they become teenagers and they get a bit lippy and mouthy. It's all part of the plan and it's beautiful. And I wish people could feel that all the time when they are tempted to use those sacred powers for something else than other than what they were designed. And then as you look at your wife years later, as you're having grandchildren, and you realize that that whole line starts with you, and it's covenant between you, your wife, and the Lord, and that together, the three of you working to bring his children into this world, and they become your children as well, and you hold them and you protect them and you love them, there is no greater rejoicing in all the world than that when you feel the heft of your babies in your hands and your grandchildren in your arms. That you know that has been blessed and ratified by the Lord. I cannot plead with people strong enough. Understands the times that we live in. Understand the slings and the arrows that are going to be cast your direction. Understand that those fiery darts are there to burn out the most sacred parts of you, of your existence as a human being on this earth, as children of a loving heavenly Father. I can't say it any other way than that. Josh, I'll turn it back over to you to wrap all this up.
I'm not here to talk about anything else. I did want to say that the temple clothing that I told you about, it matches every single piece of armor save only the sword and the shield, but there are metaphors for that. And I'm not trying to guide the future people. I'm saying the armor of God is the covenants. The covenants are reflected and indicative in the clothing that we wear. The clothing should represent these covenants. I can't say anything any better than you have. I want to admonish, if I can, in whatever capacity that people want to listen to. If you're younger, or if you're grown now and you're feeling the despondence of relationships, if you're looking at a long-term career plan and you're thinking about just moving along with that plan and giving up the idea of family or children, if there's even an inkling, and I'm talking to the fundamentalists too, because it's in our people too, but the mainstream and anybody else, that follows the covenants of the Lord, please see that your struggles here, your careers and the rest of it, unless they are subordinate to the raising of posterity for the joy and the raising of them to the Father, your living is going to become a little less purposeful. Please reclaim your purpose. And I'm talking, I think, to people that need to listen to this. I feel it. please, if you're praying and crying and wanting that, know that the Lord hears your prayers, that you can find this. Find purpose in raising posterity to the Lord in a loving arrangement, preferably celestially plural, but definitely to the raising of the kids to the Lord. Girt your loins. Girt the loins, brethren. Girt the loins with truth. Sisters as well. Girt the loins. Make it tight. Make it positive, and directionalize that desire. And I say this in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. There's one last thing I want to add here before I wrap up, Josh, and say amen to that. And that's this. If you find yourself in the place where you have made those mistakes, come back. There is nothing that the atonement of Jesus Christ can't fix to make those things right. You just have to take the first step in acknowledging you messed up, forsake that sin, and move on. There's hope in the atonement. I don't want anyone walking away from this feeling like, oh man, I've messed up and there's no hope. That's not true. There's always hope with the Savior. As long as you're drawing air, the atonement can still work in your behalf. Josh, that was good stuff, brother. I really appreciate you coming on. That was a hard one to track, but I knew you were the man for the job.
Well, I get to chat with you. Maybe we'll be seeing you. I don't know if you know this. I probably shouldn't out this. I'll throw a teaser, I guess. Drew and the guys and I are well, we're actually in it. So we're actually doing it. There's going to be a Joseph Smith translation coming out on the RV. So I'm letting you know this first. It's way perfunctory. We don't even have the original the triple out as far as in the physical, even though it's been ordered in. So, but that's the direction we're going now. And the JST is amazing. It is the temple covenant. It is when you read Joseph Smith's Genesis, it is the temple right in front of your eyes. It's the covenant to covenant men throughout the ages. It's amazing. I don't think it's, I don't know why anybody would want the JST, would not want the JST over the King James Version. I mean, the Joseph Smith translation correctly done is an adequate explanation of our faith, no matter what denomination, including mainstream, that you are. So anyway, just a little teaser.
Awesome. Well, when that gets close, let me know, and I'll have you and Drew back on to talk about that.
Perfect. Hey, brother, blessings to you and your new child, and much love.
All right, man. I appreciate you. Hang out for just 5 minutes, all right?
Got it.
Right. Bye, everybody.